I think it'd be quite interesting just to start off with a bit of an analysis of where F1 is in Canada at the moment in terms of the popularity and the interest.
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I think, like everyone, since the Drive to Survive, sort of bubble came online, it's grown everywhere, right? I think for Canada though, in particular, we've kind of always had a bit of a footprint within the sport. Obviously, dating back to Gilles Villeneuve, and then Jacques Villeneuve, 1997 Formula One world champion, and then two Canadians after that as well, with Nicholas Latifi and Lance Stroll, and so we've always kind of played a role at some point or another within F1. And so for our country, we've always had great turnout for the races. Our broadcast numbers have always been very strong. And I would say that as Formula One has gained more popularity within North America, those numbers obviously have risen for sure. There's no question about it. I don't think a lot of us really knew just how much it really grew until, I would say over the last few years. I would be walking down to my local coffee shop, and all of a sudden someone would be wearing some Aston Martin gear, or they'd have some Ferrari gear on, and I'd be like, oh my God. And then every day now, when I walk around the city of Toronto, I see somebody wearing Formula One gear. And I say, if you go back maybe 10 years ago, you'd never see that. I would be lucky if I saw somebody wearing F1 gear walking around the city of Toronto within 3 weeks. There's just no way. So that I think speaks to just how much the sport has grown in Canada for sure. The numbers, our viewing numbers are through the roof, which is, great, obviously, for everybody. I've always been one of those people who've always really promoted and supported and pushed F1 and told people about F1. And it's kind of how I got into this broadcasting thing, where it's just I just wanted everyone to understand and enjoy motorsports and the passion for it the way that I do. And I always try to not push that on people, but tell them about just how great the sport was, to get them involved, to just, you got to see these stories. And then Drive to Survive, I think, did a great job of sort of blowing that up, Yeah,
it's remarkable how that story's just duplicated in all sorts of countries, because even in the UK, where obviously Formula One's always had a pretty, well, for a long time has had a big viewership, you wouldn't see fans in team kit in the wild, once in a blue moon. But now, if I was to walk outside now in London, within a few minutes you'd see someone with some kind of F1 merch on display, which is great. And I suppose it just shows
F1's cool, Ed. F1's cool, finally.
And by extension, we're all cool.
Exactly.
That's what we like to see. But and how about the Canadian Grand Prix as an event? Obviously, I feel that event's got bigger in recent years, certainly judging by the hotel prices and the number of people that seem to sort of end up clinging to the Ile Notre Dame. It is, in my experience in recent years, a race that's slightly creaking in terms of the limitations they've got for access, etc. But it is a classic venue as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's that line, right, where you have to see, how many people can we actually fit on this island, kind of thing, right? Because there's only so much space there. But the promoters they're really I feel that they do a really good job considering just how much work they have to put into it. There's a lot that goes into getting the Canadian Grand Prix up and off the ground. Like you guys know, those grandstands and everything that's at the park, none of that is there year round except for the garages and obviously the paddock building, and that's pretty much it. And then everything else has to be shipped in, and they have to have crews building, and a lot of the times they're starting building when it's there's still snow on the ground. And we were talking about snow on the ground before we started rolling, and how challenging that actually is to work in, because it can be they can have their challenges working in winter conditions. But I think over the last few years, the sport obviously growing so much, and there's been so much appetite for F1 within Canada. And, obviously we get Canadians flocking to the race, but we get people from around the world coming to this race. And I think a big thing for us as Canadians, I think especially now, like in this moment for us as a country, there's just a huge support for it now. Like it's just massive at this moment. And I think, for them this year, it's a big year for them. I think for the Canadian Grand Prix, it's a huge year for them. I've seen pictures and photos and videos of sort of this retooled paddock that they've come up with, different things at the track now, different events and venues for the fans to get around the track and things like that. They have an app now to show people sort of where to go and where they can go. And I'm really excited to see sort of what they've done with the paddock this year, Ed, because I mean, like you guys know, right? You've been there, so you know what the paddock looks like. And so this year it's supposedly have a big refresh to it. So I'm excited to see what it looks like.
I think, Ben, if you went there now, you'd be slightly surprised by it, because they did that new paddock building a few years ago, and it has changed a lot. Because to give people an idea, before, for the media centre, for example, it was basically in for want of a better word, a big tent. Sort of backed onto the rowing basin, but now it's actually in a real building with walls and everything, and better facilities for the team. So there's certainly been investment there, although it's always had a very distinctive feel, that track, hasn't it?
Yeah, for sure. Sorry, Ben, you go ahead.
Yeah, it's a great race, one of the classics, really, and all of them have that kind of, I guess, slight tension in terms of trying to modernize and get up to standard with the kind of slick, more business focused, more razzmatazzy model that Liberty has kind of imposed on Formula One. And I wonder if Montreal is just kind of at the nub of that now. I mean, you mentioned, Ed, the difficulties they had last year, and that was you were quite, I think, furious almost when we were talking about the 2024 Canadian Grand Prix just after having experienced it. And I feel like this year is quite a big year for that race to kind of prove itself to Formula One, to Formula One management, that it can kind of cut the mustard in the modern calendar. And I mean, they have a deal, I think, until the end of 29, with this kind of idea that it extends a couple of years because of COVID, but maybe that's not guaranteed and the fees are a bit low, and they want to negotiate maybe for an extended contract. But Formula One's like, well, yeah, let's see how you get on, because last year wasn't great. We need this year to be better. So I don't know how you feel, Tim, obviously hearing more from the ground there, but it feels like a big year.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, they've really invested a lot over the past, I would say, 9 months in the grounds and how they want it to flow in terms of traffic, foot traffic, even car traffic. Getting teams in has started to become an issue back in the day, and I think that's all changed for this year. I think it's going to be a lot more streamlined. I think what fans are going to be treated to this year is going to be a lot different from what they were treated to in years past. And I think, you made a great point of like F1, the sort of the razzmatazz of it all is it's a good point, because when you take a look at a lot of the other races, that have taken things to another level, that pushes everybody else to kind of get to that level. So once you've set that standard, like you have to push every other Grand Prix to try and get close, maybe not as close as the standard, but get close to it. I mean, being in Las Vegas, like for that Grand Prix, was just, I've never seen anything like it, right? For the first year and for the second year. I went to both, worked at both, and Ed, I believe you were there. I'm not sure if you got to go at all, Ben, but like just...
I went last year. It's the hardest race I've ever worked. It feels like endless days that just roll into one.
Yeah, that's true. A lot of walking too. I remember that. A lot of walking.
Oh man, yeah.
Like, I mean, just the spectacle of it, right, is unbelievable. And I think like when you sort of set that bar, that standard, I think as F1, you kind of want to push everybody to kind of achieve something similar, because of the spot that F1 is in now, right? And it's just they have to capitalize on it. And I think for this year's Canadian Grand Prix, I think we're all going to be. It's going to be a lot different for us, I think, in a good way. So yeah.
Yeah, it's encouraging, because, like I say, they do have limitations with the geography of it, although there were some frustrations. I would say if anyone's thinking of going to the Canadian Grand Prix, be very, very careful with your hotel bookings, because that's the thing that's really wound me up in the past few years. Hotels cancelling, claiming technical problems, and then price gouging, which I've probably over the last 2 years, I've had 5 or 6 hotels do that to me, and it's quite widespread. So that's my warning, which is a shame, because Montreal is a lovely city. It's a great event, historic venue as well. So you want to see the race thriving, but I had to have my hotel dig there. But Tim, obviously the home hero is Lance Stroll. He's a big talking point. The team hasn't actually said 100% officially that he is going to race at the time of recording, but the understanding is that he will be in Montreal. He will be competing after having his little procedure. But how does Canada perceive Lance Stroll?
I think in terms of like the hardcore Formula One fans, they do know who he is. They do cheer for him when he's able to, do well, pull off points and things of that nature. I mean, Canada, the track itself, it's always been a race where, I think Lance has always gone well at, scored his first points as an F1 driver there back in 2017. And so I think for Canadians, they do cheer for Lance. I would say if Lance had a better car over the last few years, it may help spur on more of that Canadian enthusiasm. A lot of support for the team because it's Canadian owned, and big part of that obviously I think is just because of Lawrence. Like obviously Lawrence Stroll is a big name in Canada, and when Canadians understood that he was going to be getting involved in an F1 team and taking one over, there was a lot of excitement here because of that. He's the type of individual who, when he gets involved in something, he doesn't he makes sure that it wins no matter what it is. And so I think we've seen over the last 20 years in F1, right? We've seen people come in with a lot of money and buy up a team and then not do anything with it or put any money into it, just take the money out of it instead of actually reinvesting and making the team better. And I think one of the good things that Lawrence and his consortium have done is when they come in, they put money into it and they continue to put money into it, and recruiting, obviously the biggest and best minds within the sport that they can. And to me, that obviously signals that, this guy's not messing around here, right? He wants this thing to work out. He wants his team to win. He wants it to be successful. Now, I mean, that for a Canadian to see that, witness that, I think it opens up a lot of possibilities for Canadians to look at this being like, hey, yeah, we're a small country in terms of our population size, not in terms of our vast country size. But when Canadians see that, I think it spurs on others to think that we can also achieve more and greater things, being like, hey, Canadian owns an F1 team, is doing that. All right, we can do anything. This is great, kind of thing. So, I think for the team itself, I think, Canadians really do enjoy the team, like the team. They love Fernando Alonso for sure. I mean, that's definitely a very popular figure here in Canada. There's no question about that. But yeah, and I think in terms of Lance, I think, we can get into the car things. We can get into the career things and all that stuff. I think for Canadians, they just want to see him have a good piece of machinery that he can go and actually really compete in, and then they can make their judgment call on him.
Yeah, it's the thing, isn't it, Ben? Obviously, there's going to be a lot of talk about Lance Stroll this weekend. He's going to be endlessly bombarded with questions about dropping out of Spain. But that's the thing, isn't it, Ben? That's frustrating with Lance. When things come together, there's genuine ability there, isn't there? And he has, on occasion, produced some high standard performances. It's just not frequently enough. So that's the strange thing with him.
Yeah, Stroll is kind of an enigma in many ways in Formula One, both in terms of the career progression, because he's in that unique position of basically having job security, which Formula One drivers never have. And therefore, the pressure on him in terms of getting results doesn't appear to be the same. And yes, you're right, he has produced some excellent performances at times, but he hasn't really ever strung it together properly. There is a limitation in terms of the level of team and car he's raced in that feeds into that. But you've always got the comparison with your teammate, and he's never really been on top of any of his Formula One teammates properly, certainly not in recent years, certainly not in terms of Fernando Alonso, and that's kind of his benchmark. He didn't compare badly to Sebastian Vettel, but it was a small sample set, and the team was obviously not in the same established position. So you kind of don't really know where he stands as a driver in Formula One terms. And then there's also that kind of element to him where he is very withdrawn, doesn't share very much. This whole mystery that was created around his kind of sudden departure from the Spanish Grand Prix, and then no one really knowing what's going on with his injury and whatnot. I mean, obviously it's perfectly within his rights to keep it to himself, but I don't think people really understand much about Lance behind the scenes either, in the same way as maybe other sports stars. I don't know, Tim, if that plays in Canada as well. Do they feel like, as well as being slightly on the fence about whether he's worth backing as a kind of Formula One star of the future, is he just someone that people in Canada don't really know enough about and therefore can't really identify with and get behind?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think part of it is true. I think there is a part of it where I think fans would like to get to know Lance more, get to learn what he is about. That would be definitely, it would be helpful for sure. I've known Lance since 2020, probably about 2013, I would say, and around there.
You can tell us then.
So I kind of know, yeah, like, he's always been good with me. I've always worked well with him when I've had the opportunity to. I've always seen him as actually a very, very good talent, especially, in the younger careers when, actually, I'll put it this way. When I look at when I was racing, I was coming up, you knew who the talented drivers were. Then you knew the drivers who had to work hard to get to where they wanted to go. And then you understood that the talented drivers who have the talent, but they also do the hard work, they were the ones who were winning the championships. And you knew that, like, when you saw that, though, you were like, okay, once you've won one race, you know how to win another race. Once you win a championship, you then understand how to go and win another championship. So when I saw Lance, it was watching that one win, seeing that one championship, then another championship, then another championship. Then you're kind of like, okay, this guy is like, he clearly is a very talented driver. There's no question about that. You can't buy wins. It's not the way it works. And so moving him up to Formula One, I thought that he should have gone to like Formula 2 first before. This is my opinion. Before going into F1, because I think
he was chasing the Max thing, though, wasn't he? He was chasing that because he came up at the same time as Verstappen.
Yeah,
I always got this feeling that he wanted to do the same thing of like, well, Verstappen can go from F3 to F1, so why can't I do it?
Yeah, and I think that championship that he was also racing in, right? Like, for newer fans to F1, the FIA European, Euro F3 championship, like you guys would know, is stacked with talent. Like, it was stacked. Like, I mean, if you go back and look at the year that Lance won that championship, and you take a look at all the drivers that were in there from, like, Lance winning that championship all the way down to like P20, like, they're almost all of them are paid racing drivers somewhere. And that's the goal, obviously, as a driver, is to be a paid racing driver somewhere. That's what you want. But to see, Lance having beaten that amount of talent is, I mean, you just can't argue with that. But when
dominated, in fact, he absolutely bludgeoned that. I mean, I don't care what resources or backing you've got, you've still got to actually do the driving, as you say. So that's to me what shows Lance has got a lot of ability.
I think also 2020 was a year that really stood out for him because of, obviously, the car was good, right? They were obviously, they had some shared components, obviously, and other things with the old Mercedes, and he took it, and obviously we saw what happened, right? He was podiums, got his pole, probably could have won that race if it hadn't been for some floor damage. And then from there, when has he really had like a great car? I mean, 2023, the beginning of 2023 up until the Canadian Grand Prix, that car was a good car. There is no question about that. But when you're missing so much testing, I mean, I don't know about you guys, but when you see drivers miss testing, they obviously don't get into the car immediately and are immediately quick with it, good with it, feel confident with it, because it does take some time. I think Yuki Tsunoda is a perfect example, and you can throw Franco Colapinto in there right now at the same time, where you're just thrown into a new car, and it's like, okay, hey, go and do your thing. The stuff with him and Seb, that, like, Seb wasn't it wasn't like that was the end of Seb. Like, it wasn't that like he had no more gas left in the tank or anything like that. Like, Seb was actually
maybe a bit. I didn't feel like he
Ah.
was peak. I didn't think he was peak Vettel, was he? Once Leclerc kind of
he would have
levered
stuck
him out of
around though.
Ferrari.
Right? You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like I think like Seb would have still stuck around in F1 if there was an opportunity, I think, hanging around, because it's like he still had that fire to compete, right? I think if you're going to do that, then you're clearly going to be giving it your all. Why would you travel the world and not sort of give this thing everything you got, right? And so I think like for Seb and him, like that was actual like Lance did really well against Seb. Fernando comes in, and that is where he sort of raises the bar, right? Like I and it's no disrespect to Sebastian Vettel whatsoever, but for me, in my opinion, Fernando Alonso is one of, if not one of the greatest all-around race car drivers I have ever seen in my entire life. I mean, he can make a dishwasher fast. Like, he's quick. Like, there's just no getting around it. I think for Lance, it's important for him to learn from everything that Fernando can provide. And if I was Lance, I would be soaking up every bit of information that Fernando can provide, because even when this car is not good, like, Fernando still kind of finds a way of just taking it and just extracting something with it. That doesn't matter. This year, it's been a little bit different, where I don't think the qualifying has been necessarily great for Lance. And I think that's something that maybe he could work on. But I think for the races, I think Lance has outperformed him. I mean, he is the only one, aside from the last Grand Prix in Spain, to get points for the car, like with this car with this team. And the car hasn't been fantastic. Let's just be honest. When we got to Imola, I would say that's been a big turning point for this car. The floor they've introduced for it, I think, has really taken them in a big direction with this team and this car. And so, yeah, we'll see what they can do further from here. But I mean, Fernando's a tough teammate. He's Fernando Alonso. He's a 2-time F1 world champion, and he's, in my opinion, he's pretty awesome, guys. So.
Yeah, I think for me, I just want to see. I mean, he's in his 9th season. I want to see that impression that he's absolutely leaving nothing on the table in all areas, because I think there's ability, but I think in this company maybe he's a little bit found wanting in that regard. But there's no bad drivers on the F1 grid these days, so there's still that sort of hope that raw material will coalesce. But I think I want to see it delivered. You can't just think the car's not up to it, I'm not going to deliver at the best. You want to see the driver get the most out of what they've got at any given time. So yeah, I would like to see him doing that, but certainly there's raw material there that still needs to be refined somewhat. But I'm sure he's going to be a huge talking point in Canada this weekend, particularly given what's happened in Spain, and hopefully can clear up a little bit of the circumstances around that. Right, Tim, let's now move on to something you've recently put together for TSN in Canada, which is about ranking the 20 current F1 drivers. So tell us a little bit about it.
Well, I can't take full credit for it, Ed. I wish I could.
Well, you can. We're not going to stop you.
So actually, it was one of my producers I work with at TSN on the F1 side. Was his idea, and it was actually, he spurred it on back in, I want to say, February. We sat down, and he's like, "Yeah, I'm thinking of doing something different for this year's Grand Prix, some of our pre-race coverage, because we do a really big lead into the Canadian Grand Prix. We usually do about 14 days worth of content and lead up to the Friday of the race weekend." And he's like, "Yeah, I got this idea. What if like every driver drove the same car?" And funny enough, guys, like when I was, when I was coming up through racing, and you told people like in North America sort of what you did, you're like, "Yeah, I'm a race car driver." And they're like, "Oh, yeah, like what in what series, whatever. Like, what is that?" And it's like, "Oh, I want to get to Formula One. That's where I want to get to." Right? That was the goal. And it's kind of like, "Oh yeah, so aren't those cars? They're not all the same. So how would you know who's the best?" And that was always like a big talking point over here, because it's like when people look at F1, I would say especially in the United States, it's always like, well, you don't really know who the best is because they all drive different cars. And it's like, okay, well, that's a fair point. That is a fair point. So our list that our producer wanted to put together is called a pound for pound list. So if every fighter fought at the same weight level, it's like, who would be the best? and where would everybody rank. And so what we did was I didn't participate in this, but what we did was we gathered up 8 journalists, F1 journalists from the paddock. We asked Ed, but unfortunately we couldn't get Ed on soon enough.
I was procrastinating and thinking and sailed past the deadline, which I must apologise for. That's inexcusable.
So unprofessional, missing your deadline.
But like
there was a lot of swapping of positions to be done. I take this stuff very seriously.
So we compiled a panel of 8 F1 journalists, asked them to rank the drivers in order, and the consensus sort of pound for pound list. And yeah, it included a few surprises. I shared it with you guys. I don't know if you've had a chance to take a look through it, but it turned out differently than what I thought it was going to look like for some of the drivers. I don't know if you guys have had a chance to take a look through it yet before we go into this. But
yeah, we've shall I quickly just read out the list in reverse order so people can reference it? So it's 20th Colapinto, 19th Lawson, 18th Stroll, 17th Bortoletto, 16th Tsunoda, 15th Behrman, 14th Hadjar, 13th Hulkenberg, 12th Ocon, 11th Gasly, 10th Antonelli, 9th Albon, 8th Sainz, 7th Alonso, 6th Russell, 5th Hamilton, 4th Norris, 3rd Piastri, 2nd Leclerc, and 1st Verstappen. So what struck you in that, Tim?
So I would say if you went through the list, and we'll go with the bottom 5. I think Lance probably should have been a little higher. There's my Canadian bias shining through. And then also outside of that, as well as Yuki Tsunoda, seeing where he ended up, I think that was probably another one of those biggest surprise moments for where the F1 journalists saw Yuki at this moment. And I think also in that is Pierre Gasly, like narrowly missing out on the top 10 as well. So those in the bottom, I would say 5. That was probably it for us. Actually, bottom 10 if you include Gasly as well. So I don't know what you guys thought about those bottom 10 and where you see those drivers or who should be in what place.
Yeah, the difficulty I had is that if you're doing it based on kind of skill now, my ranking that I was working on, my incomplete ranking, probably penalised the rookies a bit, just because you're thinking, well, now their current level of experience. So I was slightly surprised to see Antonelli as high as 10th. I think he's going to only get better, and I think he's got a lot of ability and potential, but I wouldn't have had him that high. But I must admit, I wasn't too surprised with the bottom 3 of Colapinto, Lawson, Stroll, which in itself tells you how high quality the grid is. But I know, Ben, you've been trying to work out your version. So what were you thinking?
Yeah, well, I kind of keep a running tier list of the current F1 grid to, kind of assess in my own head, where I think everyone's at. And that kind of helps me when we come to do our end of season rankings. I kind of think everyone should be about here. Has somebody outperformed where I think they should be, etc. So I kind of use that as the basis to do my kind of 5-minute free podcast ranking job. I think the Verstappen is a standout for everyone. That's no surprise. And I think, Leclerc too. Really anyone in that top group is about right. I thought maybe Hamilton is a bit high. Now I feel like he's getting kind of legacy treatment there from the panel, because if you're looking at kind of F1 now, I mean, there's not Russell was definitively better than him last year in the same team. So you kind of can't really have Hamilton ahead of Russell, I don't think. And also he's getting beaten by Leclerc now. So if you have kind of those two in the top group, you can't really have Hamilton ahead of them. I certainly don't think ahead of Russell now. Maybe if you rewind a few seasons, sure, but not at the moment. I wondered why Sainz was ahead of Albon, because you've got a direct comparison there, and Albon is winning that. I know Sainz has the disadvantage of being new in the team, but I would say probably at the moment, very similar. I think they're kind of right to be close together, but I'm surprised that that Albon's behind in your guys' ranking. Yeah, the Antonelli thing, that stood out to me as well. I feel like, it's based on maybe Miami and everyone's kind of remembered he did amazing in Miami, which is fair enough. Peaks for rookies are definitely worth considering, but and he's obviously got a really hard benchmark in Russell, but I thought he was maybe a bit high. I thought Ocon was maybe a bit high as well, because I don't feel like in terms of raw speed, he's really really anywhere close to Behrman. Behrman seems to already kind of have that battle locked down. I know Ocon can still do it. He had a good Monaco, for example, but yeah, I don't think we've seen enough from Ocon even over the last 2 seasons really to have him that high. But the bottom group, I think, was about right for me. Tsunoda, yeah, you could say maybe he's unlucky to be low, but I mean, he suffers from having beaten teammates who haven't got great reputations now. Lawson lost his drive after 2 races, and they were much of a muchness in the RB team. Daniel Ricciardo wasn't the best version of himself in this era of Formula One, and Tsunoda and he were very closely matched. So it's hard to argue that he should be higher. But yeah, I suppose Antonelli, Ocon, Sainz, Hamilton, they're probably the biggest surprises for me.
Yeah,
you have this great challenge. Sorry, you have this great challenge of if they were all in the same car, and what's the same car? If they're all in a Red Bull RB21, you'll get a very different outcome. And that's why it's really, really difficult to rank. I can understand why people were a bit more down on Tsunoda, but if he was still in a Racing Bulls, I have no doubt whatsoever he would be a good half dozen places higher in this list.
Yeah, with Hadjar,
just like
would
that. Well, ahead of Hadjar, I would imagine.
One of the things I thought when I looked at this is like Antonelli. Obviously, I think he's going to be a great talent. No question about that. But I feel that at this moment, so if we were doing everybody in the same car all at once right now, I would have put Hadjar probably in that. And if you're going to put a rookie in the top 10, I probably would have put Hadjar in 10th and maybe moved Antonelli to 11th, or maybe put them even as a tie for 10th. And the only reason I say that is because of that performance in Monaco from Hadjar. Like that was that is obviously, like you guys know, like that's a driver's track, and driver does make
as well.
Yeah, driver does make the difference in those tracks. And so, I mean, those are big results. And so when I look at that, that's probably one of the things that I would have moved around. The Carlos Sainz, Alex Albon thing was interesting too, Ben, like that I thought as well. Like Albon's, so this is what the journalists had him as. So Albon had a 9th place vote, an 8th place vote, a 9th place vote, 10th place, 9th, 8th, 9th, 8th, where Sainz went 8th place, 6th, down to 10, 9th, up to 7, 9, 8, and then 10 as well. I probably would have put Albon ahead of Carlos. And I think maybe what some folks are thinking is that how quickly Carlos has kind of come to grips with the car as fast as he has. I remember coming into Japan, and he was saying that, I believe it was Japan, and he had said that, he's still trying to get sort of that muscle memory with the braking and corner entry with this car. And he kind of really hadn't extracted the full potential of it where he felt that Alex had. And then we get to like the next race, and it's like all of a sudden Carlos is right there with Alex in qualifying. You're just like, hold on a second here. I thought you just said that you're having trouble, getting those last few tenths out of it, and it appears you found it. So yeah, I think for having those two as close together as they were, I did agree with, but I felt that they probably should have been swapped in their order for sure. And then I don't know if you guys got an opinion. I know, Ben, you do on the Hamilton thing, but for us, so the way that worked out, how Lewis is where he is, if I just go through this, like it was a tie between George Russell and Lewis Hamilton. Hamilton had multiple 3rd place votes. And so that's what gave him the tiebreaker, obviously over his former teammate and spot in the top 5. And so I thought, I agree with you, Ben. I think, Hamilton should be probably moved down a little bit. I was thinking probably like 6th or 7th sort of thing. And then George should be propelled up a little higher too.
If everyone's driving ground effect F1 cars, Hamilton has to be lower. If this is like you get a 2021 or earlier car, then it's a completely different story.
Exactly.
He'd probably be, in the top 2.
Yeah.
But yeah, taking it as now, I find that baffling. But I guess that this is the thing about it. It's so subjective.
Yeah,
everyone can just decide what the car is and then just go from there.
Exactly.
That's the big problem, because if you're thinking about overall skill level, you could go extreme on Hamilton and say, well, it's clearly the cars that are the problem. Therefore, he should be number 1 because he's a legitimate contender to be the greatest Grand Prix driver there's ever been. But I think
you got no number 1 votes. Am I right?
No. Well, to be honest, I think it was fairly clear in the brief that I failed to fulfill and didn't vote. But it was clear that it was kind of right now on this day. And I think a good way to conceptualize this. If someone said, all right, you've got to pick a driver to drive for you to win you $1 million or whatever, just with something huge at stake, no one is choosing Lewis Hamilton over Max Verstappen right now. No one's choosing Lewis Hamilton over Charles Leclerc right now. And I don't think you choose Lewis Hamilton over George Russell or Fernando Alonso at this current time with these cars. Now, completely different story. If you look over the aggregate of their career, totally different story. But that's the way I sort of saw it anyway. But that's the thing. I mean, it's fairly, you probably see in the votes, Tim, which are anonymous, but you'll probably see signs of who's looking more over 10 years, say, as to who's looking right at this instance and what exactly do you mean by skill, etc. It is such a subjective set of parameters.
100%. And I think, even when you get further sort of up the list is where, you can even, there was even, in the newsroom, we were even having arguments over who was in the top three. I mean, Piastri, although he is a championship leader, he didn't top the list. Like, I mean, 4 voters had Piastri as the second best driver, yet, he still sits third on our list. And that's because the panel was consistent across the board with Charles Leclerc. Leclerc, received one less second place vote than Piastri did. He was the only driver not named Max Verstappen to finish inside the top 5 on every ballot that we got. And I think, when you take a look at that, I think about, well, that's interesting. Oscar and Charles, because I think Charles is I mean, his qualifying is incredible, and he's an incredible qualifier, and he's so fast. I always felt that what held him back was in the races, but I felt for this season, when I look at what Charles is doing, I felt his racing is actually, like, it looks like he's kind of taken a step, and I don't know if that's because of Lewis coming on board and Charles being like, okay, I got to dig in here and find those few little tenths that I need to drag out in a race or be competitive even more within a race and take that game to the next level sort of deal. I don't know if that's what it is, but for Piastri, he showed up this season, I mean, immediately fired out of a gun. Like, he's been incredible. I would have swapped those two. I definitely would have put Piastri second if I had been involved in the list for sure, and would have put Charles third. And obviously, I mean, I don't know what you guys think, but Max has been doing incredible things with a car that is just not very good, and he's been amazing. And I think that's shown a lot of people, like, just how talented this guy really is.
Yeah, I think the past 12 months have disabused most of those who try and claim, it's only the car, which is an accusation that can be lodged at anyone who wins, because you're only going to win in a car that can win. That's just physics. So it doesn't surprise me at all that Verstappen was on top, because, to be honest, it wasn't that was pretty much a foregone conclusion for my incomplete list. And actually, I'd have had Leclerc second as well. But then the thing is, it's so tight though, because if you look down the list, I would say there's not a driver on this list who isn't capable of producing a performance where they could get a win under their belt, for example.
100%.
And that's most seasons in F1. There are drivers you think, they're a little bit second rate, they'd struggle, but the depth, that's what really strikes me in this, because you could look at something like Gasly 11th and you think, well, Gasly's phenomenal when things are right. I mean, he's not the most consistent, there are limitations, but that still makes him kind of a middling current Grand Prix driver, and that's no condemnation. I mean, even looking down 14th, 15th, 16th, Bortoletto down in 17th, which is a bit lower than I'd have had him. He's been strong as well. So the depth is phenomenal, and actually the difference is so tiny, because the differences will tend to be in adaptability and consistency and so on and so forth. So I think people should just sort of take away from this, more than anything, just the absolute phenomenal depth. It doesn't necessarily mean it's the single 20 best drivers in the world, because it isn't, and it never will be, but it's a pretty damn good group, isn't it?
Yeah, you're splitting hairs, right, Ben? I mean, it's just that's what it is. Like, when you look at the talent that's, like Ed said, that's on this list, it is difficult to decide, like, who goes where. I mean, the talent that's on this grid right now is remarkable. I mean, even from the rookies that have come in, just phenomenal.
Well, yeah, I mean, you've got Bortoletto, down near the bottom, and he's a reigning F2 champion, and the guys below him are race winners, multiple in junior categories. I think the best way for me to make sense of it was just, well, you get this gauge of where a certain guy stands against certain other people they've gone up against directly as teammates, and then that kind of allows you to go, well, that's maybe a ceiling you can place on certain drivers like Lawson, like Lance. In fact, I'd be interested in your take on where Lance should be had you voted on the list, because I kind of feel like he's in about the right place just because of all those things we've said about, well, he's never really shone against a teammate, and certainly not drivers on this current list. So where would you have him? I think you said he was a bit low for you.
Yeah, I would have probably had him a lot higher than that. I probably would have at least had him, I would say 12th, 13th in around there. I would have probably brought Fernando down a little bit as well, only because of the season that he's had so far this season. Some of those things obviously being outside of Fernando's control, obviously. But
Too
again,
many mistakes for Alonso this year, which is a bit concerning.
Yeah, and so I think when I look at Lance, I mean, he was already in a series where every car was the same, right? And won that championship and so on and so forth, right? And that's why when we look at the list, it's like, okay, so if all of these guys were in the same car, where were they? If they're all in F3 cars, everyone was in Euro F3, where would they shake out?
But then it's like, which team are they racing for? Who's their race engineer? Who's their data engineer? Who's their driver coach?
Same team, same. Everything is the same.
This is the thing, isn't it? It's like anyone who's been around motorsport a bit knows there's no such thing, really. Even in one make series.
Yeah.
There's variations between teams, just the nature of the beast. You can never have truly exactly the same cars, which is what makes this quite an endlessly interesting experiment.
Yeah.
And I always think it's there to get you kind of thinking about drivers and what they offer over others, etc. So there's no right or wrong answer in it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, if you probably produced Liam Lawson number one, that probably would be wrong. But I don't think anyone's going to argue with Verstappen number one. Not even Ben, who holds Sebring 2014 against Max for rear-ending him.
No, I would. I think I would back Max not only in this list, but also if they were actually doing a pound for pound fighters list of Formula One drivers, if they were all at even weight, because I just think he's got that fire and that aggression. You'd probably back him in a fight against most of the grid.
Yeah. I mean, he's got that and every little bit of skill you could possibly need in terms of if you want to talk about talent. I mean, it's a horrendously talented group of drivers, this, and but Max, I think, at the current time, you just have to put him as number one. So
actually, I actually want to talk. Sorry, I don't want to hijack your segment on you, Ed. I actually want to talk a bit more about Max for 1 sec, because I had this conversation. This was also applied to this list as well, where it's kind of like when you take a look at the rookies, and the rookies now are extremely impressive, but then you look at, say, when we talk about Lewis Hamilton or Fernando Alonso, like how much sim time do you think those drivers do compared to what the rookies do compared to what Max does? Because I find like there's a swing between all of that, and I think when you're younger and you're doing more stuff with simulation, you're just adding to that experience of different things being driven, which creates different types of muscle memory when you're younger. And when we take a look at Max, I think he is that next sort of generational talent because of that, because of the things that he's done when he's younger, and because of like the simming that he still does. And I mean, he's playing, he's on his sim in his bedroom like every day still. And I think that just speaks volumes to not only the appetite that he has for racing, but also on top of that, he's just training on so many different things on so many different levels. It just adds to that sort of more tools in the tool belt, so to speak. I don't know what you guys think about that.
It can't fail to be of some use, I think. I think it'd be naive to argue that's not the case. And certainly, just in terms of ideas, I mean, he's talked a little bit before about how, for example, in sim racing, it's given him ideas for where to pull off overtaking moves that you might not have thought of, because you can try them when there's a low tariff for failure, because you're not going to end up in a real wall in sim racing. So
did he do that move that he did on Felipe Nasser at Blanchimont, I think it was in his
Yeah.
rookie season.
Yeah.
Didn't he say that was one he practiced on iRacing? So I
Oh,
think
he did.
there's been a real world application of that very thing.
Yeah.
It's not just something he said.
And you find yourself wondering about, well, the Red Bull's been tricky on things like brake feel, etc. Well, sim racing can be very tricky on brake feel. That's something I've not, when I've had my dalliances with low end sim racing, I've been truly terrible in it, to the point where, I mean, I've said before, I would do a series, I do hours and hours of testing, hundreds of laps, and I still think that if I just got in the real car, my first flying lap would have been quicker than the quickest time I got down to, because I could never tune into it. But
I think that's the intersection. So to answer your question, Tim, I think you've got the guys you identify, Hamilton and Alonso, are from the old school of, we did miles and miles and miles of testing, and we learned how to drive F1 cars of certain DNA in reality. And then they kind of adopted simulation and sim driving reluctantly, I'd say. I mean, Alonso, I'm pretty sure he had guys doing it for him when he was at Ferrari. And Lewis famously hated doing any simulation. And then as things got difficult and Mercedes struggled, you noticed he was doing more and more simulation days at Mercedes. But I don't think it comes naturally to him. Like, it's its own thing. There is definitely some like crossover, but a lot of drivers will say, you know, it's an engineering tool, so it doesn't help the driver so much. But if you're helping the engineers, that is by definition helping the driver, because in theory they're making the car better, or they should be. And if you're like Max and you are just driving whatever it is, and day after day after day after day, and doing nothing else, there has to be some, especially if you're good at both and your sensitivity is so great that you can pick these bits up from each thing and cross-pollinate them, that has to be helping him.
Yeah,
But I think it depends on your makeup, right? Because there are some guys who are incredible drivers, but they go into sims and they can't get on with them. You know, they can't get on with emotion, they can't do it. So it doesn't make them bad drivers. But surely if you can do both really well, the sim element is something you can do all the time if you want. And therefore it has to be like basically unlimited testing of old.
But I think kind of the if you might call it the sim native generations that are growing up now, probably all of them are adept and capable, whereas there's not that kind of in-between generation that you could probably say, like if you're a Bortoletto, for example, now you've done loads of sim stuff, and you're kind of a sim native. Maybe there's a few who are a little bit in between, sort of your Sainz kind of era, who will have done it, and it was a big part of things even as they were coming up, but not quite as fully proliferated. But now it's everywhere. You know, I would think if you can't do a decent job in the sim, sort of, I'm talking like the proper driver in simulator the teams use, it's going to compromise your chances of getting a race seat now, because it says something, and it's not necessarily about pace, but it just says something about you. And it's all broadening your data bank and your ways of thinking, and that's never a bad thing.
Yeah, some of the younger drivers I've worked with in the past, and like coaching and stuff, it's interesting how important the sim has to be for them. Like we didn't, not like an F1 sim. We put one in our podcast studio, and we got the full gear, full kit. And like the one thing, and you made a good point of it, Ed, is the braking. Like that was one of the things that stood out to me the most with different games that we were running through it, was how different the brakes actually feel. And for some of the games, the cars you need to brake in a different way or with a different set of pressure, and the bleed off effect has to be different as you're cornering, so to speak. And I remember working with a lot of the drivers and speaking with some of the teams and telling them that, like, the sim is so important now because teams put such a heavy emphasis on it, that yes, you're exactly right. If you're not good in the sim, then the teams aren't going to give you a chance at a test, reserve driver duty, any of that stuff. So I just find it super interesting to see, like, where when I was racing to where we are now. When I was racing, we had none of this stuff, and I'm not that old, and now all of a sudden it's like everywhere. And I just find it just so fascinating to see how it's sort of changing our sport, and just making these new younger drivers just incredible athletes when they come in Formula One.
Absolutely.
if you were stunning, like absolutely stunning in the car coming up, but you happen to not do simulator stuff, surely they wouldn't overlook you because you were no good in a simulator. It's still going to be about what you do on the track, right?
Probably not. Yeah, I guess there's all the whole motion sickness thing, but then again, the technology's improved so much now that the old Michael Schumacher motion sickness, he used to struggle with the sims. I don't think happens now because there's a lot of. In fact, we did the Race F1 Tech show interview a few years ago that talked about how much stuff had come on. So
it did to me. I went in a not quite the full 9-yard F1 sim, but the sort of step down kind of baseline model, and I couldn't get on with the motion. It made me sick after maybe a lap or two. So, but then, I'm an older generation, so maybe it's one of these things you need to do, like you say, from kind of when you're born and just live it.
Which they are now. I mean, I would say it's probably the biggest sea change there's been since karting became a thing, really, which is going back a very long way. But obviously, karting now, you have to do it. But there was a time when not everybody did it, and it didn't appear at the start of motor racing, did it? There was many decades without it. So probably it's the biggest change there's been. So yeah, I think you could endlessly discuss that. It's probably a good topic for a podcast again in the future. We've only sort of touched on it now, but I think it's a really, really interesting point. Well, finally, Ben, let's look ahead to the Canadian Grand Prix. Is this going to be another likely McLaren benefit, do you think? And how do you see it going between Oscar Piastri and Lando Norris?
That's a good question, isn't it? I think at the moment you go into each weekend kind of feeling like Oscar has the edge, just kind of as a baseline. And it's kind of whether Lando can kind of hook everything together, and relying a little bit on Oscar not being fully at it to get ahead. I mean, Monaco felt like the aberration where Piastri was chasing it the whole time. And outside of that, he's the one who's kind of got the comfort level with the car that Norris is chasing. So Piastri over Norris for me going into the weekend. In terms of whether it's a McLaren benefit, I mean, they're bound to start as favourites, but it's an unusual test because there's bits about the track that are quite similar to Imola in terms of the low grip and the lack of abrasive surface, some of the corner profiles, but the speed is obviously lower and the downforce levels will be lower. There's a much greater emphasis on the traction element rather than combined, front and rear loads. And that should suit the McLaren in terms of its rear tyre management. But then you also feel like, well, it's a curb riding track. That should help Ferrari. It should be a tyre warm-up circuit because it's, as we were talking before the podcast, Canada is famously cold, even at this time of year. That brings it into Mercedes territory and George Russell territory if they haven't got themselves lost after these kind of set-up suspension experiments that they were doing during the triple header. And you feel like the efficiency of the place, this need to be able to run as much downforce as you can, but maintain the straight line speed, that's 100% Red Bull territory. And also the kind of simplicity of the circuit from a setup point of view brings everybody into a range where, okay, you don't have to compromise so much. And that, I feel like that's got to help Red Bull when they're always, chasing a balance limitation usually. So it's quite hard to read, I think. Ferrari often seem to underperform at this track, even though actually at their core are quite competitive around it. So I wouldn't rule them out, but I also wouldn't rule out them just having a random disaster because they always just seem to have it at Montreal. Russell should be a factor. Verstappen is always a factor. But the midfield will come up to. It will be very tight because the gaps are. I like this track for Aston Martin. I like it for Williams again because you haven't got these combined corners. You haven't got these long corners, which are also the kind of corners that suit McLaren. So they should be kind of pegged in a bit for the top guys. Racing Bulls have been very competitive at this track. Daniel Ricciardo was 5th on the grid last year. So you feel like, well, with how drivable that car is, Isaac Hadjar could definitely spring a surprise if other people underperform. The only ones that are massive question marks to me are Sauber, but obviously they had a great leap forward in Spain with the upgrade. Will that translate? That's a big question for them. And Alpine are probably the one I look at and go, well, we know their car doesn't ride bumps well. They struggled massively at Monaco. And I know it's not the same Montreal as Monaco because of the downforce profile, but the ride thing I think will be a big issue for them. So if I had to pick a wooden spoon, it would be Alpine. If I had to pick a favourite, it would probably be Piastri and the McLaren, but I think Max will be right in the mix at this race in maybe a way he hasn't been in some of the others where Red Bull have been strong.
But of course, Max has got that race ban looming over him. Tim, do you think that'll have an effect? He's 1 penalty point away. He's got Canada and then Austria to avoid getting that 1 penalty point. Do you think that'll change anything? Do you think he'll... Because obviously he sort of climbed down a little bit after the race with his social media post, got as close to an apology as he could be. So he maybe knows he's on thin ice because he won't want to get a ban when he's just trying to hang on in there in the title race.
Yeah, absolutely. I think he's going to have to, right? I think there's going to be some of those pick your battle moments, pick your fight moments, but also like, pay attention as to everything that's going out onto the track. Waved yellow flags, like don't blow past those, like just all those little things that could give you that 1 penalty point. Like he's really going to have to be on his game for the next 2 races until whatever it is, June 30th. He has those 2 penalty points that come off. I'll be interested to see how he responds from Spain, and taking a look at, I mean, this is a track that he's won 3 straight at. He would be the first ever to win 4 straight at this track if he's able to pull that off. And I think also on top of that is that this is a drivers' championship battle. Like, is he just gonna let this thing sort of get away from him? And I think, obviously Spain just really shot himself in the foot there. I think Canada has to be a race where he needs to try and claw back some points to the McLarens. Like he has to, if he wants to have a legit shot at, trying to win a 5th driver's title here. Like I said, this is a track that he goes really well at, but Ben, you made a bunch of great points, man. Like if you take a look at those top 4 teams at this track, you go back to last year, this was one of those turning points within the season where, we saw those 4 teams, all of them really competitive at this track. And that sort of changed a bit of the dynamic for the season that sort of moved on from there. And you have to wonder when you're coming into this track here, again, with the temperature, the weather's supposed to be nicer, but again, it's not going to be really hot like Spain. So does that favor the likes of George Russell, who was, could have won this race last year, was very successful here last year, is a track that he does go well at. So for a driver like him, what happens with Max in the Red Bulls, and obviously with the 2 McLaren drivers as well, and Ferrari at the same time? This is a track that Leclerc can go well at. Same with Lewis Hamilton, where he got his first win, right? So there's just so many, I think, stories, especially with those top 4 teams for this particular race, that, it's going to be hard to say who's going to come out on top at the end of it.
It's one of those ones where if, say, George Russell can do one of those qualifying performances, but just when he's the other side of that sort of 1/10 down and can just get ahead and then park ahead of them and when it's possible. So, it's going to be very interesting. But I think it's a good point you make about Verstappen. 49 points now down, 9 points of those unnecessary, you'd have to say. That is in danger of just drifting out of it, because you'll end up getting into the territory where you need Red Bull to not just get on parity down the line, but they'll need to have be at the point where they've got a genuine advantage, so they can just sort of bludgeon win after win after win. Although if Red Bull is on par with McLaren, you wouldn't put it past Verstappen to be able to do that, given how strong he is. So, it feels like now we're moving into that middle phase of the season. 9 races down now. It's started to take shape, hasn't it? And it's feeling at risk, particularly with the FlexiWing TD not transforming everybody's form relative to McLaren. It's looking a little bit ever more likely that it's going to be a McLaren teammate battle. But we've been surprised before, so I think Montreal's the kind of track where you can get some really exciting racing. So one to look forward to. Anyway, we've talked quite enough now. So thanks very much, Tim, for joining us. I'm sure we'll have you on again in the future. And thanks as well to Ben. We're going to be heading off towards Montreal now, so stay with us for everything you need to know from the world of Formula One.